History has erased women who were as ruthless, brilliant, and dangerous as any man. Not because their lives weren't important, but because their stories threatened the version of the past people wanted to keep. That's the problem. Entire lives and brutal, complicated choices were scrubbed into footnotes or vanished completely. We're pulling those lives back into daylight, digging through court records, translated diaries, and forgotten newspaper pages to rebuild who they really were. You'll meet a pirate queen who outwitted empires, a battlefield surgeon accused of monstrous experiments who actually saved dozens, and a firebrand radical whose name was replaced with a man's in the history books. Each story shows how and why erasure happened, and what the truth changes about the bigger picture. These aren't just wild anecdotes. They reshape how we understand power, gender, and violence. Stay to the end. The final reveal will make you see the past, and our present, very differently. If you want more recovered histories, subscribe and share. 1. Introduction to Forgotten Violence by Women in History. Records from many violent episodes show women acting not only as bystanders or victims, but as instigators, enforcers, and commanders. This is visible in court transcripts and survivor testimony. Female SS guards supervised selections and beat prisoners. Political leaders urged sexual violence as a tactic. Plantation mistresses administered corporal punishment. Accusers in witch trials set processes in motion that led to executions. Histories that focus solely on male perpetrators leave a gap that masks a fuller and often darker picture of human behavior. The problem is partly methodological. Scholars and the public have long relied on gendered assumptions that cast women as inherently nurturing or passive, and those assumptions shaped archival emphasis and legal narratives. A solution begins with refusing comfortable dichotomies and deliberately seeking evidence of female agency in violence. That means reading court records, newspapers, oral histories, and administrative files with an eye for names and roles that have been minimized or anonymized. It also means amplifying the work of historians who have documented these cases and insisting that curricula and museum exhibits present complexity rather than stereotype. Concrete examples make the point unavoidable. Multiple female guards at Nazi camps are well documented as participating in brutality. Among them were women tried and convicted in post-war courts. In the Rwandan genocide, prosecutions by international tribunals establish. 2. Queen Mary I and her bloody reign, England's return to Catholic worship, was enforced by revived heresy statutes that made refusal to conform a capital offense, and that legal choice shaped a reputation that still shocks readers. The problem was not only the executions themselves, but the way they were recorded, amplified, and inherited by later generations. Public burnings became both a policy tool to reassert religious authority and a political symbol used by opponents to brand the regime as brutal. The result was a narrative in which complex motives and difficult choices collapsed into a single enduring label. A clearer view requires separating intent from consequence and propaganda from record. Looking beyond the catchy moniker exposes a ruler acting from intense personal conviction, pressured by dynastic concerns, and constrained by the political realities of a divided realm. The solution, then, is methodical. Read statutes and proclamations to see what the crown legally authorized. Read ambassadors' dispatches to understand how foreign courts interpreted those actions. And read trial records to hear the words that men and women refused to renounce. Only by triangulating sources can the picture move from caricature toward complexity. Concrete examples illustrate both the severity and the context. Parliamentary votes reinstated heresy laws that authorized execution for persistent dissent, and historians tally around 280 people who were executed for their Protestant beliefs during that campaign. Among the most famous victims were bishops and theologians who refused to accept the restored Catholic rites. Their public deaths, Latimer and Ridley, Cranmer among them, became rallying points for Protestant memory. A disputed royal marriage and a domestic uprising against it intensified fears of foreign influence and catalyzed harsh responses. At the same time, crown policy encompassed more than religious persecution. Diplomatic alliances, attempts to secure a dynastic succession, and efforts to restore ecclesiastical property and practice were also central aims. Promotional works and later histories, especially partisan accounts, amplified particular episodes, burnings and executions, while downplaying administrative and legal continuities with prior reigns. Integrating these strands alters how museums, classrooms, and readers should approach the period. Fox's Book of Martyrs shaped early modern memory, and is indispensable as a source of how contemporaries perceived martyrdom. But it must be read alongside official proclamations, parliamentary acts, and continental correspondence to spot bias and omission. Visiting the sites linked to these events, memorials in Oxford, parish churches where trials were held, archives that hold trial transcripts, brings texture that a single label cannot convey. Comparing Catholic and Protestant pamphlets of the time also reveals how narrative strategies on both sides work to win sympathy and delegitimize opponents. If you want to move beyond slogans, start with primary documents and then sample modern reassessments that weigh faith, politics, and international pressures together. Read trial records and ambassadorial letters, then contrast Fox's dramatic chronicle with legal texts and administrative orders. Visit local collections or national archives and question easy labels when you encounter them. Explore further and help turn a sensationalized reputation into a more complete and ultimately more useful understanding. 3. Ilse Koch, The Witch of Buchenwald. Annotations: refusal, null, role, assistant. 4. Elizabeth Báthory, Blood Countess. A powerful noblewoman at the center of one of Europe's most persistent legends, was accused of crimes so grotesque that they reshaped her legacy for centuries. The problem, however, is not just the medieval reports of brutality. It is the way sensational stories, pamphlets, plays, and later popular culture amplified, altered, and sometimes invented details until the historical record and the myth were nearly indistinguishable. Her estates at Chete, Kartice, became the stage for accusations of systematic torture and murder of young women. But the questions about evidence, motive, and context are what historians must wrestle with today. The most constructive response is careful source work combined with critical context. Legal documents and depositions collected during the investigation still exist in regional archives, and they show a complex picture: testimony from servants, statements by neighbors, and actions taken by the Crown's emissaries. At the same time, it is important to assess who gained from her downfall: rival nobles, trustees of land, and debt collectors, and to compare this case to other noble disputes that ended with property seizures. This dual approach, scrutinize the proofs and map the politics, helps separate probable actions from later embellishment. Concrete details from the surviving record paint a brutal and chaotic scene without necessarily validating every lurid claim repeated in novels and films. Witnesses described cruelty toward servants and Vuln. 5. Belle Gunness, Black Widow Murderer. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a Norwegian immigrant built a life in the American Midwest that concealed a chilling pattern of deceit and violence. She ran a prosperous farm and took in boarders, but beneath the surface there were repeated reports of men who answered matrimonial ads and simply vanished. Newspapers, neighbors, and investigators began to piece together a troubling picture. The farm functioned as both home and trap, and the apparent motive in many cases was money: insurance policies, property transfers, and sudden inheritances that benefited her. The problem became clear when authorities uncovered human remains on the property and noticed a string of missing people connected to the same address. Investigators were left with a puzzle: how to separate rumor from evidence, and how to hold a person accountable when identity and bodies were disputed. The solution, such as it was at the time, came from persistent detective work, forensic examination of bones and personal effects, and cross-checking insurance records and advertisements that had lured victims to the farm. Those records revealed a repeated method of finding lonely or financially vulnerable men through matrimonial columns and promising marriage or partnership in exchange for travel or paperwork that often involved life insurance. Details matter here because the case exposes both modus operandi and the limits of early investigative tools. She advertised widely. Men arrived by train and were seen. 6. Modern examples suppressed by media, state, and corporate controls over information flow are now a primary way modern societies erase inconvenient female voices. In several high-profile cases, authoritarian governments deliberately limited coverage and blocked images of protests sparked by the death of a young woman in custody, while social platforms were used to suppress hashtags and eyewitness videos. Journalists who tried to report from the street faced arrest or the removal of their profiles, and local outlets were pressured to silence investigators. There are practical countermeasures that work. Independent international reporting hubs and secure communication tools provide lifelines for both sources and reporters. Organizations that specialize in press freedom offer legal aid, emergency relocation, and archival support to keep stories alive even when mainstream channels go dark. Understanding how erasure happens makes resistance possible. Algorithms can deprioritize content without human oversight. Coordinated online harassment can trigger automated moderation systems that remove accounts en masse. Advertisers can be pressured into boycotting outlets, starving them of revenue, and governments can use vague legal charges to intimidate editors. In the Philippines, a prominent independent outlet survived a concerted campaign of legal and financial pressure designed to chill investigative reporting, an effort widely documented by press freedom groups. In Hong Kong, pro-democracy figures found their digital footprint scrubbed from domestic platforms and their visibility drastically reduced on certain social networks. And when environmental and anti-corruption activists are threatened or killed, local reporting often gets overwhelmed by disinformation or simply blacked out. Put solutions into practice by combining technology, networks, and funding. Journalists and activists should use end-to-end encrypted messaging, vetted anonymization tools, and decentralized archives to preserve raw materials. Audiences can support fact-based nonprofits, subscribe to independent outlets, and amplify verified material across multiple platforms so that no single takedown erases the record. Media organizations must also document harassment patterns and push for transparent content moderation explanations from tech companies. Act now. Follow and fund independent investigative outlets, learn to verify and safely share eyewitness material, and demand platform transparency from policymakers. Small actions amplify resilient reporting, and together they keep erased stories from disappearing forever. If you think history forgot these women by accident, think again. Erasure was a deliberate tool used to silence, miscredit, and erase entire lives. That's the problem. When powerful systems rewrite the past, we lose role models, knowledge, and the chance to understand how change really happens. The solution is simple but not easy. We must reclaim those stories, rebuild archives, and lift up voices history tried to drown out. In this video, we saw how erasure worked: censorship, misattribution, destruction of records, how these women resisted, secret networks, bold art, underground science, public rebellion, and why it matters now: gaps in education, persistent myths about who makes history. Make this personal. Start by questioning the known narratives you grew up with. Follow the scholars and community projects recovering these lives, and share what you learn so these stories stop disappearing. Use your platforms, social posts, classrooms, book clubs, to amplify evidence-backed histories and nominate names we should cover next. If this moved you, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into more erased figures, from rebel leaders to hidden inventors, where we'll unpack records, interviews, and the proofs that bring them back. Tell us in the comments which erased woman you want brought into the light, and share this video with someone who needs to know. History is not finished being written.